Welcome to another episode of the Baxter School Shootings Podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K-12 School Shooting Database. Just last week, there was another school shooting at a high school just outside of Denver, Colorado. It was a 16-year-old student who opened fire in the cafeteria during lunch. He fired shots in the building. He chased students as they were leaving. He reloaded multiple times, and then he killed himself when the first police officer arrived and found him. And in the aftermath of this attack, there are mentions to being radicalized on social media. And I think that that's a term that it's really easy to just gloss over when you're reading the details of these events because, what went wrong? Oh, they were radicalized online. But when we look at these patterns over the last year, there are 4 different school shootings. The one at Evergreen High in Colorado last week, at Annunciation in Minnesota at the end of August, at Antioch High School in Tennessee back in January, and then at Abundant Life in Madison, Wisconsin in December, where each one of those school shooters was radicalized online. But they were all radicalized in the same way. They all were engaging with the same community, with the same types of content, and they were actually engaging with each other. They were having direct contact. They were using each other's usernames. They were mimicking each other's photos. So there's an online subculture which is part of this radicalization. And to talk about it, I have an expert in that field, a de-radicalization coach who's a licensed mental health professional. So my guest today is Allizandra Herberhold, who got her master's in clinical mental health from Washington University in St. Louis. Allizandra, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Can you start by just giving a little bit of background on yourself and what it means to be a de-radicalization coach?
Yeah, definitely. So, my background, I started working in the mental health field about 6 years ago before I got my master's. And I've worked in a variety of inpatient settings. So, I've worked at drug detoxes, psych hospitals, I worked at a forensic mental health hospital. And so, this is the first job that I've worked that is remote. And I kind of pivoted a couple of years ago. I started getting more interested in behavioral threat assessment and management, started doing some trainings in that while I was getting my master's, and began doing my own independent research on mass shooters. And one of the things that I stumbled across was the common thread that they talk to each other online, they idolize previous mass shooters, and they have a subculture that's also a community for them. And I have been documenting, archiving, and just lurking within the community for the last 2 years to really get a better understanding. So when I began working at Parents for Peace as an exit interventionist, we work with all different kinds of ideologies, ranging from the far left to the far right to anything in between. We work with adolescents and adults. And I have really been learning more after working face to face with people who want to carry out targeted violence attacks, that there's a lot of common threads that I'll talk about today that is also relevant in the shootings that David had mentioned earlier.
So in the kind of aftermath of 9/11, there was discussion about, what online radicalization starts to mean, where there were PDF documents of, different Al Qaeda and ISIS materials. And then as YouTube started to gain popularity, there would be some video clips and things that you could watch on YouTube. And I think that's where people started to think about you could be radicalized online without ever meeting the person who's radicalizing you in the real world. But that was a very kind of one-way uh, sharing of information where a group like Al Qaeda is putting out the information and then it's up to somebody to engage with it. But it seems now that there's a much different environment where there's a lot of two-way interaction. Like what are the spaces and types of um, sites that students are interacting with, that these teens who are being radicalized are involved with?
So, a lot of what I have been seeing, especially for much younger, like people who are in middle school, that are beginning to get radicalized, a lot of it started on Minecraft and Roblox, where there were adults that were on there. And it's pretty free form, the websites, and you can go into all these different worlds. And basically, they befriend the young person and kind of groom them. And get them to go onto a separate website. And usually it was Telegram for a long time, but now it's much more Discord. So Discord doesn't have any rules, there's no parental controls, and they will begin to expose them to things or kind of, whatever grievance the person has or thing that they're struggling with, they either prey on it or, begin to build them up as a form of grooming. And so we see it like that, but I also see it as a loneliness problem, similar to what you had spoken about with 9/11. Back then, people were much more engaged in person. Most of the clients that we work with, they're not going to in person meetings for an organization. A lot of it is going to be lone actor terrorism, where they want to carry out an attack by themselves. So, a school shooting or anything else. And they will log on to websites, and I see it on all social media platforms. I've seen it on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, Tumblr, TikTok, um, Twitter sometimes. Um, but all these different websites that they go on, and then they kind of see these previous mass shooters, and I see them falling into three different categories. The first one is romanticization, where they overlook the crime because they find the perpetrator to be physically attractive. So then they kind of print pictures of them out. Maybe they have a little shrine on their wall or something like that. And then there's also the idolization, where they think that the shooter's really cool. They idolize them because of the amount of victims that they had is a high number. So they feel like the attack was successful. They liked their manifesto. And then we have the identification, which is the really, really dangerous one, because they want to emulate the previous attack. And so that's a lot of what we're seeing on those three that you had spoken about, where it's kind of been a ripple effect, where you see the same common thread of using a white Sharpie to write the names of previous perpetrators on your firearm, or having a shirt that is an ode to a different mass shooting, like the Denver one.
And I'll put a link in the comments because a lot of people are just not familiar with what Discord is or why it's different. But just the quick 15 seconds on it is Discord is a multimodal messaging platform where you can post pictures, you can text, you can live chat, you can live stream, you can have video content, but it occurs within individual chat rooms. And a lot of those you need to be invited to. So you can't just search and find random content. It would be a totally private group, and it uses a distributed server system. So that means that the Discord data is in different places all over the world. So it's almost impossible for the FBI to subpoena this unless, the company willingly turns over the information. But a lot of companies don't want to do that unless there are extreme circumstances, because then it's going to make them a less popular application. So a place like Discord, a parent or a school administrator isn't going to be able to just stumble into the area where students might be talking about extreme violence. That's happening in a private, fully encrypted space.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and they also use Signal, which is a free kind of chat messenger type app that is fully encrypted. You can set the messages to disappear after a certain amount of time. A lot of organizations, including ours, use that to communicate. So I know that people also, that one has become more popular as well. So,
Yeah, and I mean, parents also need to understand that these are very mainstream platforms. Just about any kid who's involved in video games is going to have multiple Discord channels around the game, around game content, around different teams on the game, different events with the game. for all completely legitimate purposes. Just about any journalist that you see their profile, they almost always have a Signal um, contact link in that, because journalists want people who are going to make anonymous tips to be able to reach them from anywhere in the world. So just because you see the Signal app, or just because kids on Discord, does not mean that they're committing violence. What parents need to do is to be able to spot the signs that their kid is starting to engage with some dangerous content that's not mainstream, that's starting to radicalize them. And Alexandra, what are some of the warning signs that, say, a parent could look for that might show that their kid's engaging with some of this content?
So, one of the things that we see a lot, especially with the younger kids, is when they become so obsessed with this community or anything else, there's something called leakage where they will start to talk about it because they're so obsessed about it. So, maybe they'll out of nowhere suddenly be like, "Oh, mom, did you know about this mass shooting? Did you know this about Columbine?" One of the things that a teacher from the Red Lake shooting had said in hindsight was one of the warning signs for that shooter. He would randomly say things to her in class like, "Hey, did you know that Adolf Hitler was good at math?" And things that had nothing to do with class. So if they're randomly talking about those things, if you're catching them watching gore content, which I'll talk more about, that's also a warning sign. Pulling back, isolating, spending more time online, disengaging with friends that you know and believe are good examples. Um, those are a lot of the warning signs. A sudden fascination with guns, suddenly out of nowhere wanting you to take them to a shooting range because they've never done it. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a red flag depending on where you're living and the culture that you have, but that is something to explore the why behind it, of why they're wanting to do that. And yeah.
And that's very consistent with an episode that I'll also drop a link into with Dr. Adana Sur from Effort University in Germany. And she did a study of the social situations and social histories of school shooters. And she found that 98% of them had easy access to firearms in their home, which meant that it was a home environment where the use and readily accessible loaded weapons were something that was normalized and regular for the family. And in the majority of those mass shootings or school shootings, shooting sports or shooting or gun related activities were the primary family bonding activity. So if there is a kid who you're not in a family that has that as a core part of their culture, but suddenly they're very interested in it, that change of behavior could be a warning. Of these last four school shootings, these pre-planned school shootings at Antioch High, at Annunciation Catholic, at Evergreen High, and at Abundant Life, all of these shooters were involved in TCC, or true crime community. And I think as an adult, you hear true crime and you think it's going to be the cool podcast where, somebody's looking at an old case. What does true crime community mean for teens and adolescents?
So it is a subculture online that, as I described before, they're either romanticizing, idolizing, or identifying with previous shooters. And they're going to share memes about them. They're going to create a sense of community. They're going to create chats, little pages. A lot of them make fan art. A lot of them will print photographs of the perpetrator out and frame them, hang them on their wall, make keychains, things like that, because I think a lot of them at that point don't fully, especially with the romanticization, they don't fully grasp that it's a real person that did this and not a movie character. And they kind of rewrite the way that they see them and project. But one of the main things with the true crime community is that these people are having a parasocial relationship, usually with someone who is deceased. So most of the perpetrators that are really idolized are deceased, which is another layer that is very bizarre, and I think could seem harmless to a parent, because it's not as if you're having a warning sign that they suddenly want to write a mass murderer in prison or something, like the person is deceased, so it doesn't feel like a threat. Um, but a lot of them, they encourage each other. They sit around like any other kind of fandom and fangirl or fanboy about the perpetrator that they like, make fun of the ones that they don't like. And most of the people in the true crime community, I wouldn't say are inherently dangerous, but there definitely are the ones that are. And there is a lot of warning signs that can happen. And again, with the leakage, I've seen on on platforms like Tumblr, where people will post a picture of something, of a shirt that they made, which is another marker of previous mass shootings. There's a 1 or 2 word message on the shirt, which comes down from Columbine and has been repeated over and over. And they will post it and say, like, what do you think of this for my attack coming up? And more recently, one actually did happen that afterwards I saw that they were pretty big in the true crime community, posted pictures to some of the people in their group. And it was a 12-year-old girl in Mexico. And she brought an axe to the school and attacked someone at the school. No one died. One person was injured, and they were able to remove the axe from her. And so a lot of them, they begin to document and research other mass shooters, and depending on their mental wellness, because a lot of this isn't a mental health issue, it's a mental wellness issue. It can't be fixed with just medication. You have to remove the person from the environment and stop them from seeing these things and engaging with these things. At the organization that I work for, we view this and radicalization as a form of addiction to hate, where you become entrenched in this and it feels like a sense of normalcy, similar to drug addiction or porn addiction or anything else. And you keep getting more and more extreme, especially when you're around other people that are condoning your behaviors. And you get lost, and it becomes your entire personality and sense of being. And so to help that person, you have to help them change their people, places, and things. And I think that the media often misrepresents incidents like this as just a mental health issue, because it is so complex and they don't know what to do and they're scared and they don't understand. And it's easier to just write things off as a mental health issue. But if that were the solution, then all we would have to do is involuntarily commit someone to a psychiatric facility, and then they would be good to go. But we know that that doesn't work, because in a lot of shooters' histories, they've had an inpatient stay and they still carried out an attack.
Yeah, I think that was really evident from the episode that I did with a forensic psychologist, where we looked through the manifesto of the Central Visual and Performing Arts shooter, and he was hospitalized multiple times. He was under the care of 5 different physicians who he all listed in his manifesto, and he talked about how easy it was to manipulate them and how easy it was to change his story. So when somebody has severe mental illness, if they have paranoid schizophrenia, it's not something that they can turn on or off, and they're not living in a lucid world where they're making plans or making attempts to either be suicidal or not be suicidal. Like, it's very different circumstances. I want to get back to your point about the fan art for a minute, because if any of the listeners haven't done it, it's fascinating, but it's disturbing. If you look up any of the notable school shooters and just put in fan art or cartoon or drawings, there are thousands of pictures of the Sandy Hook school shooter, the Parkland school shooter, the Columbine school shooters, in all kinds of different fantasy scenarios, and drawn as heroes, and drawn in biblical ways, and drawn in every possible different context. And this is part of the reason that I really think it's important for parents to know the names of school shooters and know the faces of school shooters. Because with the Madison, Wisconsin school shooting last year, she had a shrine to mass shooters and school shooters in her bedroom. But if they're kind of drawn to look like K-pop stars or pop stars, a parent might just think that it's some music group or some, YouTuber that they don't know about. So this idea of no notoriety and not naming or showing the faces of the shooters, the kids are going to find them online. Kids who want to engage with this content are going to find it. It's parents who are shielding these images from themselves. And if parents don't know the names and the images and the nicknames and the terminology and the symbols around these shootings, they're not going to realize that the thing on their kid's wall or the background on their phone is actually a reference to a prior school shooting. So another question I have about the true crime community is not only are they kind of talking about mass shooters and idolizing prior mass shooters, but that's a way that a lot of gore content of every context is shared. Kind of how would you describe gore content to somebody who's not familiar with it?
So, unfortunately, most people are under the false assumption that you have to go onto the dark web to see gore content. But it is on the clear web. You can type it in to Google. There's a very specific website that a lot of these shooters have profiles on. So gore content is going to be things like ISIS beheading videos, the cartel beheading videos, murder videos, suicide videos, that if we think of an exposure to any kind of gore that we didn't want to see, maybe you drive by and you see someone in a car crash. Like, that is a traumatizing experience for you to see if you're not asking for it. And most of these kids have been engaging with gore content for years. And similarly to porn addiction, it becomes addictive, where the best way that I can describe it is that if you look at it through the lens of pornography addiction, most people, they may look at a Playboy magazine and then it doesn't do it for them anymore. So they look at a video and then they look at something that's more extreme, like BDSM, and then that doesn't do it for them. So they continue to level up and watch more and more so that they can get that same feeling, because the fear of doing something you're not supposed to be doing is very alluring and fun, and you get a rush from it. And so these kids have never seen things like this. So when you see it, it's like a train wreck. You can't look away. It's very shocking. And again, because they're so young, they're not fully seeing and understanding that this is a person and it's not a character in a movie that's being killed, that this is a person, a real person with a family. And so most of the clients that I've worked with recently, I began asking them about gore content. And what I've found is most of them started watching it in middle school and then have compulsively continued to watch it. And their parents never knew, because they just didn't. A lot of these things like Discord, they share the videos in Discord, or they will do prank videos where it looks like it's a video of a kitten with the little picture, and then when you press it, it's a beheading video or something. So you're not asking to see it, but you're being exposed to this. And depending on what person is speaking to them online, this sometimes can be a form of grooming, because they want to overexpose them to things like this so that they will be desensitized, and it's easier to encourage them to carry out a targeted violence attack or to consider carrying out a targeted violence attack. And it's easier for them to be manipulated, to join an organization or to, be groomed by someone.
And I mean, as you noted, this isn't the dark web. I think something that has an enormous impact on definitely kids and teens, but probably all of us, is in the last 2 years, all of the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, have almost all either completely removed or really gutted their trust and safety teams. So where there used to be a lot of regulation of content, there were buttons where you could click, report this is violent content, this is graphic content, and it would be immediately frozen and flagged until it was reviewed. I found out about that with the school shooting database because just tweets about school shootings a couple of years ago would get frozen for content review, even though I was just providing text information about an incident. So that was where we were a couple of years ago, and it flipped to the completely opposite direction where
Mm-hmm.
I stopped posting on Twitter because even a chart of the number of shootings per year, people were posting in the comments pictures of lynchings, pictures of murder, um, and just extremely graphic content for just the shock value of it being there. And then we've also switched culturally into some of this gore content being very mainstream. In the last 2 weeks, the president has tweeted out or messaged out pictures of people on a boat, and you can see people moving around, and then a missile destroys the boats. That is not as graphic as watching an ISIS beheading, but we are normalizing that there are some moving people in a picture and all of a sudden they are vaporized by an explosion, or the knife attack that occurred on a subway
Mm-hmm.
where they're saying, this is the most terrible video I've ever seen. There's this video,
Mm-hmm.
horrible, horrible. It's going to scar you if you watch it. That's telling people to engage with this gore content, and it's happening in a very mainstream way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this has also been a prevalent theme for some mass shooters, especially the ones who really idolize the Christchurch shooting that happened in New Zealand. The perpetrator there had a lot of victims and he live streamed the entire thing. So you were able to watch a long form video that was a POV, as if you were playing a video game or something. And that inspired a lot of other attackers who have failed miserably at live streaming an attack. Um, but a couple of them have been successful, and those videos also circulate a lot. And the bodies are not censored. You see the person deceased, you see the blood, everything. And again, you're seeing it on the clear web, you're seeing it on social media. I've seen lots of things like that on Facebook. And, the people that are sharing it are older people. They're not children, but they have a friends list of how many people of all ages, probably. And they're sharing that content because it's become normalized to them as well. So I think that this is also a social issue that we're having, that this is becoming acceptable to engage with content like this in general. And children are just following suit because it's easy to get to. And I haven't had a single family I've worked with that ever had parental controls on their children's phone.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to in 2022, there was a Las Vegas Harvest Festival style attack at a private school in Washington, D.C., where a guy had 1,000 rounds of ammo and 6 rifles, and he had rented the fifth floor apartment across from a school. And he had a scope that was set up to live stream. So
Mm-hmm.
he started live streaming as soon as the shooting took place by, I mean, just complete luck and his own incompetence. He fired 238 shots at the school in less than 2 minutes. 4 people were wounded. Nobody was killed. But on Twitter, all of a sudden I saw this video and it's a rifle scope with a red dot and it's tracing across kids who are walking on this glass bridge that connects the two buildings on campus. And then all of a sudden, you just see dust and glass, and then it's pointing at the sky because it was an automatic rifle. So with the recoil, most of the bullets went directly up and like landed a mile away. But I couldn't at first. I thought this video is fake. Like this can't be real. But then it was real because there's a capability to live stream this, and each of those 4 school shootings that I mentioned, at Abundant Life, at Antioch High, and Annunciation, and Evergreen, when you look at the comments posted online, they discussed either watching live streams, being part of live streams. The Abundant Life school shooter was in the live stream during a knife attack by a neo-Nazi in Europe. And then they discussed the Antioch High shooter wanted to live stream his attack, and he was live in the bathroom as he was getting ready to commit that. Another point that is getting a lot of attention this week, and I just wrote an article about it, is groyper content. How would you distinguish groyper from TCC, true crime community, or kind of the gore fetishization?
So, groypers, the best way to explain them is that they really like trolling. They like making fun of people. They go out of their way to try and trick people that they dislike into saying something so that they can get themselves in trouble. And they just honestly do it because they think it's funny. It's not really rooted in, connection with any one specific person. There's a lot of wanting to accelerate the collapse of the Republican Party specifically because they don't feel that the Republican Party is conservative enough or Christian or white enough. They are basically against pretty much every protected class that you could think of. And a lot of it, I think they repeat memes and quotes that are inside jokes so that the outer people looking in, they don't understand. And we see this with a lot of different things. One of the prevailing things with it too is that they all follow an influencer, Nick Fuentes, and their mascot basically is a different version of Pepe the Frog, that green, poorly drawn frog. And a lot of the people identify as groypers themselves. They'll have it in their handles on social media. They take pride in it. Sometimes you'll see in their bio, it says America First. They always identify as Christian. The family that I worked with that had a son who was a groyper, one of the ways to rise up in ranks once you're in that community is converting to Catholicism. So that can also be an indication if you are a non-religious family and then all of a sudden your young son, because they don't take women, your young son is really, really, really motivated to become Catholic and is not willing to look at any other denomination of Christianity. And it seems out of left field and they can't really identify why. And then they want to go to the conversion classes, and maybe they've become more political and isolating more. That can all be indications that they're beginning to engage with content like that. A lot of it can be found on incel chat forums, 4chan, these more obscure kinds of things. And groypers tend to be usually legal adults. And I think part of that is the more political aspect of being able to vote and things like that. And a lot of it is more college age people that I've seen.
Yeah, the recent very clear groyper case at schools is Antioch High School in Tennessee, which was in January last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a really important note, is that the shooter was black, even though the groypers have extremely racist content. But in his posts, he talked about how he hated himself for being black. He hated that he was black. So he was radicalized kind of into self-hatred. And his username was the name of the Madison school shooter plus groyper. And he posed for a bunch of pictures on social media before the attack. And one of them, that there's a sad Pepe the Frog, that's a really common groyper image where Pepe is wearing a black Adidas tracksuit and he's kind of kneeling with his arms on top of his knees. And the 17-year-old kid at Antioch High took the same picture in an Adidas tracksuit. So there's there's this blending of real life and these cartoon memes where somebody tries to recreate things from the meme world in real life. So, I mean, that's again why parents need to be familiar with this content, because if you don't understand what the meme means, you don't know why all of a sudden your kid is wearing, fish t-shirts to school every day with a bunch of tie-dyed t-shirts with frogs on them. And that's because maybe they're trying to send a really coded message that they're part of this without overtly, having Pepe on their shirt.
And one of the things that a lot of people do find exciting, and this is within any kind of radicalization, is the idea that they're pulling one over on people. Like they say a meme to you, or they're like, hey, mom, look at this. And you look at the meme and it makes absolutely no sense, but they know exactly what it means. And there's a deeper connotation or a deeper meaning behind it. And then that's very funny to them. So, a suggestion for that, and for if your kid has suddenly a shrine on their wall when they never had one before, or they're journaling and they have pictures of these people you've never seen, take a picture of the picture and then go to Google and reverse image search it and see what comes up. Because if it's art, if it's a previous mass shooter, it will come up and you will be able to tell what it is for the most part. Because if you ask your kid, they're not going to tell you. They're going to say it's a friend. They're going to say it's a character on a movie or something else. But they're probably not going to be honest with you, and you're going to need to do your own investigative work and not just overlook things and hope for the best. Because we've seen time and time again that something bad happens when people aren't willing to ask more questions.
Well, that, pull one over on the adults is absolutely true from the abundant life shooting in Madison. So I was a 15-year-old girl, and her father was posting pictures of her at the shooting range. And
Mm-hmm.
she's wearing one of the t-shirts from the Columbine basement tapes, which is the name of an obscure Euro 90s punk band. And it's like there's no reason for a 15-year-old girl in 2024 in Madison to have any interest in some random
Mm-hmm.
Euro punk band from the 90s, but her dad is just totally oblivious to it. But if you know all of the subculture around this, you would immediately spot it and be like, wait a second, this girl is literally at a shooting range wearing a Columbine t-shirt. Like that is saying overtly, I'm part of this and none of you realize it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A recent case that I have that was an indication for me as well. There were two things that indicated to me, which I think it can be important for parents to know, similar like that, is there is a gator mask that is black and it goes over your nose but doesn't cover your eyes, and it covers your mouth, and it has a skull mouth on it. And this has become, it was more of a Nazi thing, but it's really become a staple of mass shooters. And a lot of the people that are referred to me that are obsessed with targeted violence and want to carry an attack out, they have one of those and they take selfies in it. That's another thing that they do, similar to how he was speaking about another shooter that was mimicking previous images that other shooters have taken. So that can be an indication. And another thing, too, similarly talking about a 15-year-old girl suddenly knowing this 90s obscure band doesn't really make any sense. And there is a video game that Columbine, the two Columbine boys, were obsessed with. And the kid that was referred to me recently, the only poster on his wall was of that video game from the 90s. And he's like 15 also. It just made no sense and was a huge indicator to me that there was something deeper. And when we did look deeper, there was a lot of concerning things happening. But if I didn't know those small things about the subculture, I would have never asked those questions and he would have continued to fly under the radar.
Yeah, and the skull mask. I mean, just last week, the Evergreen High shooting in outside of Denver, where that was a 15-year-old student. He posted the selfie in that same skull mask, and the Antioch high school shooter wore that as well. In the Evergreen case last week, it was not just the skull mask, but parents also need to know the symbols, like if they did find it and see it. So not only did he have the skull mask, but on it he wrote Al Noor, which was the New Zealand mosque attacker. He had the number 14 on there, which is the white supremacist 14-word slogan that they have. 88 was on the mask, and H is the eighth letter in the alphabet. So it's Hail Hitler is 88. White supremacists have been doing that for years. He had a cross drawn on it, but it is a Celtic style cross with a circle around it. So if you see a cross with a circle, that's usually a white supremacist symbol, where it has like the interlocking cross with the circle around. And he also had TJD written on the mask, which is total Judith. So parents, like, there's no parent, there's no teacher, there's no normal school counselor who wants to be like really immersing themselves in white nationalist and neo-Nazi like culture and symbolism, but these kids are operating in deeply coded environments, but they're doing so with the intent to be seen, which means there's a chance to stop this. So if a parent does spot some of these warning signs and they seek out somebody like you, who's a de-radicalization coach and a licensed mental health practitioner, what can you do to help de-radicalize somebody?
So it's different for every person. Similarly, like with any other addiction, there has to be a little bit of motivation. One of the perks of working with adolescents is that parents have a lot of leverage over their kids when they live in the home, and they have control over their finances and what they're able to do. So sometimes it looks like having to literally take their phone and their laptop away when it's not used for school things and just completely unplugging them from an ideology. And a lot of the things that I do is I don't challenge their ideology. I ask a lot of questions to have a better understanding of it. And I try to look at like what's behind the ideology. And a lot of times I try and explain it to other people as, if you see like a 4-year-old screaming and crying and you know they didn't sleep well last night or something, like, you shouldn't get annoyed with the screaming and crying. Like, you should look at what's behind it. And it's similar to this, where it's like, okay, why are these kids like looking at this? What is behind it? And more times than not, I just see them being really lonely and they feel like a loser. They're not successful in areas that are important to them. They don't have other people to bounce things off of, especially when working with adults. A lot of them are not in college, they don't have a job, they're at home with their parents again, and they don't feel good about themselves. So if a person can say, well, I feel like a loser, but at least I'm white, so I'm better than everybody else, they're going to cling to that because that's the only thing that they have. So we work with them to try and help them build confidence in other areas. And the goal that I work towards is trying to help them create a life that's so good that they let go of the ideology. They're not attached to it anymore, and they don't feel like they need it, because a lot of times they're using it to pacify these feelings, these negative feelings that they have about themselves. And instead of turning it inward, they decide to turn it outward. So we encourage people to re-engage with the community. We encourage people to re-engage with friends, try new hobbies, try old hobbies, have these kinds of conversations without judgment with them about their ideology, try to figure out like the why, and try to get some buy-in so that they'll actually be honest with you. When it is appropriate, we encourage them to have therapy, family therapy, medication. We have, at times people have had to have inpatient behavioral health stays. It really just varies on the person. So we're willing to meet people wherever they're at. And we're not going to come at them with judgment. They can tell us all these things that they're saying and thinking because someone has to hear them. to know the severity of it and to be able to assess how far along they are on the radicalization scale. But it takes a lot of time and it takes a village to help the person. Um, and so another thing is similar to just regular drug addiction or anything else. A lot of times there are relapses, but that doesn't mean that they slid all the way back and that they're not ever going to be willing to engage again. Like sometimes they seem like they're doing very, very good, and then they have a bad day, and all of a sudden they're saying a bunch of things that you haven't heard them say in a long time that's hurtful and mean. But they're falling back into these negative coping mechanisms, but we've been planting seeds and showing them that things can get better. So just being patient and like giving this person that you care about grace to mess up and be like, okay, you made a little mess up, that's fine, now like what are we going to do next?
And then on the other side of that, because prevention is always something where a little bit of effort can stop something before it starts and save, a huge amount of effort to bring somebody back. If you're a parent of, say, a young teen or even a middle school kid who is getting their first phone, what can a parent do to try to prevent their kid from getting involved with this content?
It's always good to have conversations about digital literacy and to just like have conversations with your kids and ask them like, what are you looking at online? And a lot of times when I have the conversations with the kids, I ask the questions with the assumption that they've already seen it. So I ask them, when was the first time that you saw like a gore video? Because they most likely have seen it. And even if they didn't see it on their own phone, someone at school, someone on the bus, a friend, you're at someone else's house, they're going to show it to you because they're so wowed about it. And again, having a response of following it up with questions and not freaking out on them and kind of, seeing like, well, how did it make you feel? Like, have you thought about it? Has it been difficult for you to sleep? All those kinds of things. There's also other applications like Bark that parents can download to have controls on their child's phone where you can add in words that are blocked so they can't search things like beheading. Um, and it's not going to, constantly be monitoring everything that they're doing on their phone. Like it's not, you can mirror the phone and look at it, but it will just add a buffer to make it a little harder because a lot of times people do these things because it's readily available and it's easy. And if they have to, work harder to go and look for a beheading video, they might lose the motivation.
Yeah, I think that is a really important part of this because, you know, very objectionable, very violent graphic content has existed for a long time. I remember, this will date me because I don't feel this old, but around middle school or so, that somebody had a VHS tape of bum fights, and this was a series where guys would pay homeless people to fight each other or to jump off of walls, or one guy was paid to let them hit him with a car, and it was really objectionable, really graphic content for probably 11 or 12-year-olds to be watching. But that videotape just existed there, hidden in the basement of one kid to be able to consume for a couple minutes before a parent got home. um, when when the phone is available, especially if the phone's not monitored, then just like that porn addiction that you mentioned, they can look at and engage, and the last thing that they see before they go to sleep can be a video of somebody's head being chopped off. It's freaking
Mm-hmm.
crazy, but it's
Mm-hmm.
the reality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think you've covered, so many things about prevention, what this space means, what you can do to help. Are there any resources that parents should know about, where they can get some more information about this, or how they can get in touch with either you or people like you?
Yeah, so the organization that I work for is called Parents for Peace. We have a helpline. You can go onto our website and then call the helpline or send us an email inquiry, and the helpline coordinator will reach out to you to do the intake. And it's free because it's a nonprofit. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to talk to people. I have my email on my LinkedIn, and I'm happy to talk to parents. I'm happy to talk to law enforcement or anyone else, schools, educators, anything like that. And a lot of it is just having to just Google things and try to figure it out. It's gonna take a little bit of time, but be patient with yourself as well. And, use the internet to your benefit.
Well, I will have a link to your organization as well as a link to your LinkedIn profile there. I suggest that people follow it. There's a lot of very good information on there. So a heavy topic, but this is not one that parents can turn away from. So Allizandra, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're probably going to talk again.